My name is Ari. I go by codeofcrypto on Farcaster. I've been on Farcaster for a little over 2 years. Loved every moment of it. And I think the most important thing for me from Farcaster, which I think I'll touch on as I give you my introduction here, is that relationship capital is invaluable to me. And I've found like untold riches of relationship capital on Farcaster, which is why it's such an important platform to me. And I'm sure it's been said before, but I think a mantra that I like to live by is that like my net work is my net worth in some ways, right? And so like it doesn't matter the recession or the downturn in the market, as long as you have good people around you, you're always going to be in a good spot. And so that's something that I found in Farcaster, and it's something that's kind of echoed throughout things that I've done along the way. Um, for some background and context, I am a crypto attorney right now at a law firm. I live in Boston. But I like to say I'm kind of like an East Coast person. I'm usually somewhere up and down I-95. I like to go to DC a lot. A lot of the work I do comes through New York. So I'm often up and down the I-95 corridor. Um, but I kind of took an unconventional path into crypto and into law. So I started out actually with the background in molecular biology right out of undergrad. And I initially came to Boston to work in cancer research. So I worked initially in the pharmaceutical industry, then I worked at one of these genomics research centers in Cambridge with the idea of just doing a PhD and going to graduate school, working in the biomedical sciences. I worked on and built some early stage drug discovery platforms. And then kind of had this pivot in 2014 where I wanted to get out of the lab, get out of my comfort zone, and kind of work more directly with people. I think something I felt about research was that while it's very interesting, you're kind of a few steps removed from the beneficiaries or the people you want to touch and impact. And I was also at the time like 24, 25, didn't have a lot to lose by doing something different. And so I quit and I became a community health worker in the streets of Boston. And so for the next 2 years, I actually worked at food pantries, shelters, needle exchanges. I was like a street outreach worker. And I went to neighborhoods that I otherwise would have never really ventured into, and often the neighborhoods that people told me to avoid. And during that experience, um, it astonished me that, you read about these studies that like you can go like 10 minutes outside of Boston and see life expectancies that are 25 years less than the Back Bay, for example, right? And I was, going to these places, and it's just like there's so many missed opportunities to help people. And so there was one particular neighborhood touch point I used to work at in East Boston, and I met a guy named Huey who was actually a homeless guy who ironically was a direct descendant from the Mayflower, but had
Hmm.
also kind of lost his way and was drinking Listerine and wearing a green hospital gown and just walking around the neighborhoods of East Boston. And something about him just blew my mind. I think it was maybe just his personal journey, kind of, we talk about rags to riches, but we sometimes don't think about the other direction, how people can kind of lose it all. But also this concept of like leaving cancer research in Cambridge, where we were using at the time, like, precursors to AI and like machine learning with these big data genomic sets to identify novel therapeutics. And then here we have a guy in East Boston drinking Listerine, going in and out of the hospital 4 or 5 times a week. And how is it that we have all these resources dedicated for these other causes, but we can't solve what seemingly are like rudimentary issues? I just couldn't quite grasp it. It just kept sticking with me. And I'd see Huey every Thursday night at this touch point in East Boston. He was kind of going through the same vicious cycle. And then I thought to myself, all right, well, if I want to understand this more, maybe I should just go to the hospital that he goes to. And I started actually shadowing the emergency departments at Boston Medical Center and other safety net hospitals around the city. And I sometimes I literally saw Huey there, but I saw a lot of other Hueys like him. And this is kind of a long preface, but basically, with this experience, I ended up like building a digital health platform called Boswell, Boswell, and the link is boswell.io. And the premise is that, like, can we strengthen these safety net touch points that are like under-resourced nonprofits that are not really technologically equipped, but are also like invaluable sensors in the neighborhoods that are just collecting a real-time stream of information on people that are like Huey, but also the check engine lights before him. And can we like provide them with some tech, free software for intake and reporting, but also in the back end, connect the dots between these touch points that haven't really been construed as part of the medical home, but actually exist outside the four walls of the clinic as like extensions of the medical home. And can we connect those touch points back to healthcare? And so really, like, this is all to say that from those experiences in East Boston, after leaving cancer research in Cambridge, I spent the next 8.5 years just building and iterating on this platform called Boswell. And I really, didn't know what I was searching for, or was just kind of just working on something. And, with these pain points in mind. And I didn't even think I was going to start a company or what was going to happen. I was just like, I found some friends in the neighborhood who were developers. I'm not really a dev, although I've kind of picked up some things, but I'm still pretty weak in that side. And we just started building something, and we put it out there with neighborhood touch points. We narrowed our focus to food pantries. We built like what we thought was like the best in class food pantry software. We got a real critical mass of hundreds, if not thousands, of pantries across the country to start using this software. We're able to start connecting the dots with health insurance plans, and just kept iterating and working on this. And then along the way, and I don't know how many tangents or little side vignettes I should go into here, but like I started to realize that like there's a lot of like policy issues upstream that some of this tech can't really solve, and I became very interested in those, and that's what prompted me to pursue a path into law. I think a side note, which I kind of omitted here, is that I at one point considered medical school and was very interested in becoming a primary care provider after seeing people like Huey, because in my mind, in addition to what I was building on the tech side to strengthen the safety net, I thought, well, there's also like just a lack of primary care in this country, and a lack of like, gatekeepers in the healthcare system that can help, be liaisons for people in need. And so I actually applied and almost went to medical school at some point along the way. But I basically became interested in law because I was thinking about how can we give more of a voice to those that don't have one, and especially in these populations. And so I went to law school. There's a whole, side story I can share about that experience and kind of what that was all about. But long story short, I went in with like a public interest advocacy sort of mindset. Did some work in legal aid during my summer internships, and also while I was in law school. It didn't feel like I was always doing legal work at that level. It might be something that like people can debate, as they hear about this. I'd be happy to kind of hear other people's opinions, but there was often a lot of missed opportunities in the legal system, which I thought to myself, like, going in as a public interest guy, I can't really solve that. And so like I was kind of at this crossroads even when I was in law school. I was like, wait a second, I went in with this mindset of like doing legal aid and advocacy, but oftentimes the way it's set up is it's not necessarily scalable and sustainable to really impact the masses and do so in real time. There's a lot of retroactive things that happen. There's a lot of things that are kind of removed from the direct beneficiaries and the people. But there wasn't like the kind of fast, scalable stuff that I wanted to get involved with. But meanwhile, I was actually still working on my company as I was in law school, and the pandemic hit in 2020. And without going to all the details and nitty gritty about how the company operations were running, basically it brought what we were building to like a grinding halt, because the premise of what we were doing is we were building software for these neighborhood touchpoints to use to kind of check in people as they came through and connect individuals back to their respective health plans and providers and kind of avert like missed opportunities to coordinate care. But when all those neighborhood touchpoints shut down with the pandemic and none of them were running, our software is effectively kind of useless. And so I had a team of 2 developers and myself, and we had like a year of funding for runway. And we were just kind of sitting there, like, what can we actually do here with this time and resources that we have, and also in this like unprecedented moment, that is the pandemic. And so as we started kind of talking to the people that we were working with, something that stood out was that um, welfare lines, like unemployment lines, food stamp lines, all those things, um, you know, they were just kind of out of control. And one of the biggest bottlenecks, in addition to the fact that there was a tremendous demand, was that the ability to process applications was really, really slow. And if you actually like scratch the surface and look under the hood, a lot of government welfare programs are run on like COBOL systems from like, I don't know what specific decade, but several decades ago. And they're highly inefficient. Some will debate maybe it's intentionally so, but I mean, I'm not going to get into that. But we were just astonished, like how slow that process was. And so we actually, like I said, we had some time to ideate and some resources to kind of tinker around. We applied for like a federal grant to scope out what would it look like to put government benefits on chain. And I had very limited like crypto blockchain experience understanding. This is like 2020. But one of the devs I was working with was very fascinated by this. And he said, like, why can't we just smart contract all these things? Why can't we get to a place where like, you become eligible for food stamps and all of a sudden there's some way to, you know, query your eligibility and then validate like who you are and distribute benefits. And like I didn't fully understand the framework, but we kind of wrote the grant and started tinkering around with this. And we actually got some funding to work on this in 2020, and we built like a benefit screening tool. And we actually, maybe naively at that time, went to like different health and human services offices in New England. We said, look, we're actually building a way to put food stamps on chain. And kind of got laughed out of the room, but it was a way for me to get exposure to this space and you know just kind of scratch the surface of some of the possibilities. And I think really from that point onwards, I was like, wait a second, this is like a really powerful tech, and it's hard to just categorize as one type of umbrella technology, but like it started to kind of address and the at least my personal interest of like how can you scalably, sustainably, and impactfully deploy something that can meet people's needs immediately. And I know like you know it might not be like in the near term we see benefits on chain, but like those kind of concepts got me really interested in blockchain, crypto in the space. And that also led me to like a pivot when I was in law school to like saying, all right, is there an intersection or a nexus of like crypto and the law that I can scope out further? And as I was like, scoping that out, I realized that one of my professors in law school is actually married to the founder of Algorand, Sylvia McCauley. And so it just so happened I was talking to her about like kind of this inflection point that I was at. Like, well, like I'm interested in public interest law and advocacy, but like there's this area of crypto and like this, really uncharted territory that I think this tech could go towards. And obviously didn't know the whole, magnitude of the space. And she's like, "Oh, have you heard of Silvio?" And I was like, "No, not really." She's like, "You want to talk to him?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And so, around the time, kind of serendipitously, as I was like working on this benefits side project with the startup, I had met with Silvio, and he taught me about Algorand, and kind of just gave me a primer on like just crypto, blockchain, and that's when I started kind of diving into these communities. Um, and sometimes through Discord channels, sometimes through meetups, and just kind of just I think as a lot of people get into this space, just chipping away and tinkering and just kind of incrementally improving your knowledge base. And it's like I think like all things, crypto in particular is like a contact sport. You really can't understand or appreciate it on the sidelines. And even if you're not like a builder directly, at least as like a user or just like someone that's in the game, right? That's the best way to learn, right? And so, I mean, I think that's true for a lot of things, but particularly here, right? Like there's so many things you can just like talk about theory and so forth, but I think, I mean, you have to just dive in, right? You have to connect wallets, you have to get rug pulled, you have to kind of go through all those different steps. And so, yeah, so I kind of pivoted towards like crypto and the law, and then basically it changed kind of my career trajectory a little bit. And I thought to myself, like, initially when I went to law school, the conception was I'd do some sort of public interest work, I'd keep working at the company, and like I could kind of tether the two together. But when I realized like that working at the company, but also trying to dive into crypto and the law, like those two couldn't really, meet somewhere in the middle. I had to kind of, you know, move on from the company. And so actually, I was fortunate that around the time I was at this inflection point, there was a person I met who was a graduate student in Boston who was working on an earlier iteration of what that company was. And I initially said, all right, well, maybe like I could hire him and he could be kind of like the heir apparent. But then, kind of long story short, as we discussed this with the board, he became the immediate successor, and he's done a great job of like pushing forward the company to the next stage. And so it's like tough to kind of move on from those things, especially when you kind of put 8.5 years into something. And like you know I didn't get into all my trials and tribulations along the way. I mean, like bootstrapping for a while, maxing credit cards, sleeping in the back of a Subaru on the way to like investor meetings. Like we've done all that stuff, right? So I have utmost appreciation for anyone that's kind of out there playing the game right now. Um, but I was also just fortunate that like even if the company like doesn't look exactly like what I might have intended for it to look like or what I might have manifested way back when, like it's still having some impact, and it takes time for things to grow, and it's still kind of out there. It's out in the wild, right? Um, but it also kind of, it's some of those skill sets are not necessarily tangible, but I just feel like there's like some really powerful experiences that I met that I met with along the way, and I'm still trying to actually reflect and distill what those specifically are. And so maybe like one of the things I've been focusing on a lot more these days is actually just like writing those stories down, those experiences, to kind of just understand what it is that I did during that time, and maybe if I jump back in, like those can be put to use. But anyway, this is to say that like I transitioned out of the company at the end of 2022. And then I kind of maybe felt like I had a little identity crisis in 2023, because I was like, wait, like, what am I? Like, what am I doing here? But I was fortunate to join a law firm. I think the advice that had been given to me is like, look, like a law firm after law school is like going to residency after medical school. Like in some ways, like it's a way to just to kind of fine tune skills and solidify like what it is about a space. And so I've been fortunate to kind of work at a firm where I can do crypto and law almost exclusively. And along the way, I got into Farcaster, and actually, when channels first came out in like I think December of 23, I just got some warps and I launched the Law and Policy channel. And selfishly, it was for me to learn more about crypto and the law from other people posting on there. And I think that's very much happened. Like it's like exceeded all expectations, and I've been very grateful and fortunate for the people that have just been providing their thoughts day in and day out. Um, and then I think the secondary thing from that, which maybe I didn't expect, is that like there's a community that's being built here, and and something that's been interesting is that like you don't often think about like lawyers and policymakers as builders, but in crypto, I think they are, because like this area of the law is very much in its nascency, and some people have compared it to like Delaware corporate law in the 80s, right? When like business judgment rule and like Unical, and like all these things were coming out that later became like core tenets of corporate law today. We're very much in a place where like as a young lawyer in crypto, like you don't have to look very far back and you can learn everything that's happened in the case law and also just like from a regulatory standpoint and like see like all the different upswings and downturns like pretty quickly. And so there's a real opportunity to kind of just see this area from the beginning and keep adding to it. And so yeah, so law and policy has been a very interesting community. I was fortunate to actually get a portion of that degen airdrop earlier on, and I just put it in a Uniswap liquidity pool, and it's kind of become like a slush fund for like happy hours. And so something that's been fun is just like every couple months or so, just in whatever city I'm in, I've just tried to bring together a group of people, and maybe inadvertently in the last like year and a half, maybe like 200 of us have come together in 9 to 10 happy hours in 6 different cities. And it's just another opportunity to connect and learn and build relationship capital. And so that's kind of what that's been about. And who knows what's next, but I'm very, very fortunate that at the very least, like people continue to cast in there. There's vibrant discussions and there's just so many opportunities to keep meeting people, not just in the US, but globally too. I mean, that's just like, I mean, in the spirit of decentralization, like crypto is really bringing people together from all corners. So
Yeah,
I
it's
went on a lot of
a
tangents.
no, it's a really great story, and I appreciate you sharing it. And obviously, a lot of hard work in various chapters from law school to working on the startup for several years before that. Sleeping in the car, like you said, sounds like you've sort of been through quite a lot since the early days of cancer research, and there's obviously like you've sort of taken a pretty um, a path with a lot of variety to it. So maybe a lack of a path is the better word. But it's always interesting. I always sort of, I tend towards people who do things like that and stay less in sort of the same lane for a long time. I always find it quite interesting. And so, like researcher, potential like doctor, then, entrepreneur and now lawyer and in a bunch of different spaces and now crypto is interesting. And obviously you've got sort of like other strengths and things that you lean in on as well. Like I think casually having, you know, 9 or 10 or whatever it was meetups in several different cities and a couple hundred different people from Farcaster is like not something that most people would do or could do or have done. I would suspect that if you've facilitated meetups of like 200 Farcasters, you're probably one of the top 10 like meetup organizers on Farcaster, and some of the others might be more like sort of it's part of their job or something like that. Are those all people from the law and or mostly people from like the law and policy channel that you created, or is it just a general Farcaster meetup?
I usually kind of advertising through law and policy. One thing like even as like a channel feature, and maybe it already exists out there. Like I've always been wondering if it's possible to like index casts. There was a point like last year I was like, what, like so many people are casting so much like just incredible insights and valuable information. Like this has to be like chronicled, or maybe it needs to be like a volume of the channel, like for
Right.
law and policy volume 1 2023 to 2024, like here's what everyone posted, right? So somewhere in there, like every time there was an event, I'd say local lawcasters, like we're getting together, you know if I had a picture, I'll share one afterwards. But the ethos is that it's like it's open to everyone, right? And so yeah, I've been fortunate to like meet all sorts of people, not just from law and policy. And the other part of this is that I think like this concept like lawcasters, I don't know if I coined it or not, but it's kind of the lawyers and policy makers on Farcaster, like they have a lot to learn from builders, and vice versa, like builders can learn a lot from us too. And so I think it's really important that it's just, it's not segmented to one group. I think it's really valuable to have diverse perspectives. And I mean, even just with tech and law, there's always that kind of push and pull, but it's just very interesting to learn from one another in that way. And then that's really kind of the driving, point for all these things, right? I want opportunities to meet people, but also to learn from them. And if that's in real life, all the better. But at the very least, like just getting, unique perspectives across the board.
Yeah, I think, probably most people who are in that like sort of law and policy group also don't have, it would seem pretty unusual to have as many years of experience on the building side of things as well. So you probably are able to sort of like, straddle the line between these builders and lawyers who, to your point, have, a lot to learn from each other. And especially in crypto, where I agree with you, like law has an outsized role in these early days, is like a lot of what has been holding back various pieces of the industry arguably has been laws or a lack thereof in terms of clear regulation by which people can operate, especially in the US. Do you have a sense for, obviously we're only less than a couple of months into this new administration in the US, but do you have like a perspective on how the tide has shifted or is shifting with, everything from the SEC pulling back on various cases they had going against Coinbase, Uniswap, and others, to just the more generally pro crypto stance, where it seems like there's an ability to give the benefit of the doubt that this administration is not going to be trying to sort of like, you know, uh, I don't know, be anti-crypto basically, for lack of a better word. And like, because there's always, I don't know, your thoughts as a lawyer, but I feel like there's often the ability to, um, go after someone with the law if you want to, like if you sort of premeditate, we think this person should be in trouble, so we're going to find a way to show that they've done something wrong. Like you can often find something as small as it might be. And it feels like that's what a lot of crypto founders have been experiencing in recent years in the US, at least. And now it feels like sort of the dogs have been called off, not to take like an overly political stance or anything, just strictly in the domain of crypto policy. So I don't know if you have any sort of thoughts on how the tide might be shifting there.
Yeah, I mean, first I'll say I think there are like so many more like really sharp minds that I just benefit from learning from, and in the channel and just across Farcaster that have so many like great detailed, like more granular perspectives. And again, like I learn something on Farcaster every day, like whether it's law and policy related or just something outside of that.
Can I
Um,
can I also start? Sorry to interrupt, but can I just ask out of curiosity, like how many like actual like lawyers with some semblance of a specialty in crypto are actually on Farcaster? Like just very roughly, I know it's like a tough question, but obviously you have oversight of the channel. Like, is it like
yeah,
10 or 100 or 1,000 or just order of magnitude?
yeah, it's interesting. Someone asked that question, and then someone like kind of tagged me in for that, and then I actually just went through like the people I've met on here, and I didn't even go through like half of my list, and I like already found like 50. And so I would guess like at least from the folks that I know, at minimum 100 people that are like
Yeah.
into crypto and legal, that practice or have practiced at some point along the way. And that goes from like, I mean, look, like, even like SEC Crypto Council is out there on Farcaster. Um, if you look at across the venture funds, there's a lot of like really, really just brilliant people that have crypto and law backgrounds. I can give some shout outs, but just keeping it at a very high level, like there's quite a few people there. There's quite a few people with like crypto and tax backgrounds. Certainly a lot of people that have been into litigation. Some of them are working in-house now at like the big known entities. And then actually, if you like take a step back, even globally, like I've met some really interesting people like in Europe and even in South America, and even one person in Singapore, like that just like are in the space. And so I would have to say at least 100. I mean, I think there's like maybe 16, 1,700 people that are like following the channel, maybe a couple hundred members right now. They're posting the channel. But I maybe for one shout out, like, this icebreaker platform is fascinating to me, for so many reasons. And I've gotten to meet the team there. Uh, and I think that concept of like being able to verify your credentials, like, let's say in some universe, like all of us were on icebreaker, maybe we could actually start to quantify that and see what our backgrounds really are and how they converge and intersect. So,
Hmm.
um, like I might be verified there as an attorney. I think Dan might have done that, but like I'd be curious. Like they might have an interesting data set on that too.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's more than I would have expected. It's Farcaster, like it's obviously there's I think they recently passed 1 million signups, but obviously a lot of those will churn, or have churned, I mean, and then a lot of those might be sort of like bots or whatever, and then
Sure.
a lot of those might be people who just aren't very, like, maybe they haven't fully churned but they're just not very active. So you sort of strip it down to whatever the number of like actual daily active users is, and you've got some number. I don't know what that is, but even from there, like, it just sort of feels quite small sometimes. Big enough that it feels like a sort of a real social network, which I think has been the case for a while, but small enough that you see a lot of you know the popular content and posts and whatnot are sort of from people you've seen before and things like that. And so it's helpful actually to sort of hear about a niche that I personally don't really see much of anything from, because I'm not following that channel as of now, and probably don't follow too many, if any, of the 100+ people that you're talking about. And so it's just interesting when you sort of
Sure.
hear like, hey, there is this niche of really valuable content on Farcaster that I'm not being exposed to, as of now, and I would like to, because I am curious about these things. And so I guess that sort of segues back to my previous question before I sort of interrupted with the other question, of just sort of like how you feel about the I guess direction, or what your view is on sort of the direction of crypto policy in the US right now. I know it's obviously a large question, so feel free to take it in whatever direction you want, or sort of focus on whichever piece is interesting, but would just be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So I mean, I think yeah. I mean, I think we got on that tangent because I was kind of alluding to all the really interesting perspectives, and I'm constantly learning about like those different tidbits and insights every day on Farcaster. Um, just taking like a broader view, I mean, in the last couple of years, I've really been thinking about just like this concept of like federalism, right? This like tension between federal and state rights, and in the Constitution, like there are some rights carved out for the states that aren't federal powers and so forth. But like I think you've seen this kind of push and pull between like big government, small government, like really since the beginning of time for this country, right? Like, and I think we're starting to see a bit of that play out here, right? And I think the pendulum has swung in this direction where like initially there was, concern with crypto, like taking away like that opportunity for big government to operate. But now you're starting to see like a move towards like deregulation, but also kind of like, pushing things to states or like, you know, kind of minimizing the influence of government in some of these things. And so that's kind of like my framework for looking at a lot of this. And, it might not be one that everyone agrees with, or it might not be even the right one, but like it's something that's fascinated me. And I think that we're just kind of in this trend line right now towards like and maybe this is the way that the pendulum is swinging right now, where it's already swung in that direction, where like you look at things like the Chevron doctrine kind of being dismantled. You look at like the West Virginia versus EPA case where they kind of raised like the major questions doctrine, and like that's kind of become quote unquote good law out there. Those are all kind of signals that like this era of like pushing towards big government, that's kind of fading, at least for now. And so I suppose that's bullish for crypto because of the era we were just kind of in, where there was a lot of like just crackdown on anything that was going on. Some of it pretextual, and any number of ways we can kind of interpret that. But I think there's also a part of this that like even if there are favorable regulatory tailwinds, I think we just have to kind of wait and see, and also like um, let things play out. And so I'd say like uh, I'm of the view that there are like positive signals ahead, without getting into like the nitty gritty of like which regulation and what's going on. But I'm also kind of like, uh, you know, these time horizons take a while to play out. And so like, just like you know, looking at a stock chart, right? Like, something goes up 10% on one day, that doesn't necessarily mean that like the next 5 to 10 years are going to look a certain way, right? So I think we have to kind of see the weighted moving average of how things proceed. But I mean, as far as I can tell, like I've met just like phenomenal people through this platform, and they're doing very interesting things. And as someone that was in a builder phase, I think it's very easy to build and ship products, but it's harder to kind of solve problems. And sometimes those are kind of unfortunately mutually exclusive. But I'm starting to see like and feel that people are building and solving problems in an increasingly more favorable environment. So I think as you see those things come together, good tech, good policy, like I mean, it should just benefit all stakeholders. And that's maybe it's like an overly optimistic view, but that's kind of my sentiment right now. And this whole piece of federalism is it's like it's been very interesting to me, like this big government, little government, just paradox. And just a little side note, like when I was on that path, when I wanted to become like a housing lawyer or like a public interest advocate, I was so perplexed why people like were so behind eminent domain, right? I don't know if you've paid much attention to eminent domain. There's like a Fifth Amendment taking clause. Um, and there was this case in the Supreme Court a couple of years ago called Kelo versus the City of New London. But I was like one of the few people in my law school class that was like so like against eminent domain because I had worked in neighborhoods where eminent domain was like disproportionately occurring, and like just compensation, quote unquote, just compensation uh, for taking people's private property for public use in those settings was often very low. And there's like a variety of reasons for that. And I remember my property law professor just in front of like 80 people just said, "Oh, it's because you're a libertarian. You hate this." And I was like, "Well, I didn't say I was a libertarian, but I was just like more curious about like how there are certain people that can advocate for housing, but they are okay condoning eminent domain and like taking of people's property, often happening in marginalized communities." And there's a mentor of mine who's actually a judge, and he basically kind of distilled it down to like this concept of like federalism, right? I mean, like eminent domain is in a place where the government has like almost unhinged power to do something. And so if you're of the notion that like you like big government, then you might like eminent domain. And so I think sometimes like a lot of things kind of cut through those lines, like big versus small government. And that's the reason why I've been increasingly like viewing even crypto regulation through that lens as well. But time will tell.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective in that I don't think people necessarily, I don't think everyone connects the two. It's definitely not sort of like the first connection that I make, but it does make a lot of sense. And like, beyond the sort of seemingly favorable towards crypto stance of the current administration, probably one of the only things that's sort of more evident so far is this sort of significant shift from big government to small government at the federal level, putting power in the hands of the states. Doge cutting the budget, just generally, trying to decrease the budget, let people keep more of their money, hopefully not pay as much taxes for things that, that go towards government spending that they don't care about or want to be spending on. And it just seems like it's sort of been, things have been inflating on that path for a long time. And finally, or rather a group of people have sort of put their foot down and said, we want something different. And I think that's also just sort of the way that the world has moved in more naturally, like that. What do we need from the government? We need like military defense, but we need like sort of a police force and various things. But like a lot of infrastructure is built. Like sure, some of it needs maintaining and whatnot, but it just doesn't seem like people need as much from the government. Like for me personally, it doesn't really matter like where I live. Like I could go live internationally somewhere. I kind of just need, Wi-Fi and the peace of mind that like I'm not going to have outrageous crimes committed against me, like in the physical world or something. And that's kind of good. I'm sure there's like a few other things, but it's like not that much that I feel like, I need to be paying like these large taxes, let alone, as you get higher up in the tax brackets, like you're just paying like these wild sums. And I just saw this thing, like, I think it was within the last week actually, that I don't know if it's true or not, but there's like sort of a rumor at least that they might cut, basically like removed federal income taxes for like anyone who makes less than, I think it was like $100,000 or $150,000. And I had sort of like floated this idea on Twitter a few weeks ago after like sort of stumbling upon what percentages of the federal income tax like revenue come from various tax brackets. And it was basically like, I forget the exact numbers, but I think I want to say 90% of taxes in terms of the revenue came from like the top 25% of taxpayers or something. It might have even been more extreme. It might have been like 90% comes from the top 10% or something like that. So there's like a real power law. And removing, also if you cut the number of people paying taxes by 70, 90%, whatever, you're cutting the administrative, overhead and workload by a lot as well, saving money there. Like just sort of seems like a practical thing. I'm sure there's like other trade-offs and whatnot, but yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting direction. I wish, we could talk more about this stuff. Unfortunately, we're coming up on time and I have another thing right after this, but
Sure.
I appreciate, you taking the time. I think your story is fascinating and love everything you're doing on Farcaster and look forward to, checking in on the law and policy channel a little bit more, getting involved and getting familiar with that corner of the network.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time and reaching out. And if you're ever in Boston or if you're at FarCon, look forward to meeting up. And yeah, and I'm just excited to see how this all, turns out, right? Just more than law and policy, but just everything that we see on Farcaster, right? It's all an iterative process, right? And so, and what that entails is we just learn lessons at each step along the way, but we can see how these things are applied in real time and to make things more seamless and smoother. And so it's really just fun. Like I'm not really in like a direct builder phase right now. Like I'm telling my wife, like, we just had a kid, like, I'm kind of like building a family right now, but at least I can kind of, live vicariously through some of the people that are out there actually building and kind of see what they're doing. And it's a very exciting time. And I think a lot of people get that, but I feel like I really need to emphasize it. It's a really, really special time and it shouldn't be taken for granted. Like the opportunities to learn, to connect, and just like see this all play out. So
Yeah, I totally agree. And congrats on starting to build a family. And I
yeah,
will, or at least I am planning to be at FarCon. So hopefully we'll be able to get together there.
yeah, yeah. Look forward to making it happen.
Awesome. All right. All right. Well, I appreciate the time again. Great talking. And I'll see you on the feed.
All right, thanks, Jake. Take care.